Several government employees have been caught trying to apply for the 350 Rand COVID-19 relief grant. The fund is meant for the unemployed. Sassa picked up the attempted fraud by cross-referencing grant applications against the government databases to find out if they are civil servants. The checks found several Sassa employees also trying to apply for the SRD grant. The agency has promised strong action against its employees who try to access the grant despite not qualifying for them. Sassa is also urging beneficiaries to draw their grants or risk losing them. Now, for more on this latest development and scandal, some would call it, of government employees applying for the 350 Rand Social Relief of Distress grant despite being employed, and now joined by Sassa spokesperson Paseka Letsatsi from here in Johannesburg. Paseka, thanks for your time as always. I'm going to admit, when I saw the headlines with this latest development, I did go, of course they found government employees trying to apply for this grant. Was that your reaction as well?
Good evening and thanks for having us. Look, I think it's always shocking when you hear that people do not necessarily qualify for a grant go and apply for it. And I think in this instance, Marcelle, is that we have these people who work for the South African Social Security Agency who have applied for a normal Sassa grant, not necessarily 350. And what we simply did, it about 100 of them, and what we simply did was to basically suspend the grant and institute a process of investigation immediately, because we need to get to the bottom of the matter and find out exactly how did these employees of an organization apply and qualified for a grant.
Now, what led you to believe that you should do this cross-check? Was there a tip-off of some kind?
I think basically what's happening is that our system as such that have improved, and we basically bounce whatever that we do with other government departments. We also do the checks and balances to see exactly what is happening. And I think some of the security measures are such that they are able to pick them up. But remember, we have been putting a microscope, especially on the Sassa employee, in terms of whether they are able to do what they are supposed to do without being engaged in corrupted activities and so on. And our fraud and management unit has been trying to make sure that it does those particular checks and balances. And fortunately, this time around, 100 of them were picked up. But I think I must clarify it, that we would want to let the processes to unfold, because some of them might be qualifying correctly, but we would also want to find out, if you were not employed and you are employed now by Sassa, why don't you voluntarily come forward and say that I am now employed, I'm getting a grant, now can you please cancel it? But we will definitely go to the bottom of the matter, and I promise you, Marcelle, once the processes are completed, we'll definitely come back to you and say these are the results.
Now, obviously, a grant for those who are unemployed is not the only kind of grant that Sassa gives out. Like you rightly mentioned, there would be employees who would qualify for certain grants. For instance, the foster child grant is an example of one of the grants that they could qualify for. Is there a need for a system to be put in place that your employees have to declare if they qualify for certain grants and are indeed drawing those grants, just to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again in the future?
No, you're quite right. I think what we'd expect is that we need to set up systems, just like now we've checked up our system, hence we are able to pick them up. But secondly, we also rely on your good gesture. I mean, if we are getting a social grant and you get employed, we expect you as a law-abiding citizen to say, yes, I was not employed, yes, I was getting a grant, I am now employed, can you please remove me from the system? Because if you don't do that, unfortunately, you will be caught, we'll investigate, you'll be caught, and once we catch you and we find out that you were actually trying to defraud the state, we will then take the file and hand it to the South African Police Services for further investigation. And unfortunately, if the results are otherwise, you'll definitely be thrown behind the bus. And I don't think people would want to go to prison for something that they can simply come forward and say, can you please remove me from the system? And we can then be able to close the chapter.
Now, there's a means test that every application is put through before a Sassa grant is indeed rubber stamped and put onto the system. Explain to us what is that means test, and how do you keep track that that means test is actually being applied to every name that ends up being put into the system?
The means test would subject an employee to, for example, if the amount, there will be an amount kept to say, if for you to be able to get a grant, you cannot earn beyond this particular amount of money. Your spouse must also not be getting a particular amount of money. We will take you through that particular process. And if you qualify, because you can be employed and perhaps, I'm just making an example, and earning 800 rand a month, which might be below the amount of money which is kept so that people do not earn above it. And you can then be able to apply for a grant and get it. However, if you pass the means test, you are able to get the grant. And at some point, you might find that you were not employed, but unfortunately or fortunately, when you get absorbed into the market, you need to make sure that you become a good citizen and declare that my condition has changed. But obviously, once the fraud and management unit is done with making those particular investigations, they will then compile a report and give it to us. And I think they will make necessary recommendations against these 100 employees. Like I'm saying, some of them might be guilty, and some of them we might find that they are not guilty, but obviously we would want to wait for that particular process to unfold, so that when we take action, we take a decisive action, we act and act decisively.
Now, you're dealing with big numbers here. Just this week, on Wednesday, the first of the second phase of payouts of the COVID-19 social relief of distress grants was paid out, the first batch on Wednesday, and it's been reported that you will pay out 2.1 billion rand this month alone, and more than 10 million people applied for the grants on your various platforms as well. How satisfied are you that Sassa has enough staff, specifically in the important fraud department that seems to have their hands full right now? Do you have enough resources to ensure that you plug up all the gaps, and indeed those people who deserve to get this payout and indeed need this payout get the money at the time that they need it most?
Look, I think, thanks for that question. I think this time last year, it's been 15 days since we opened the system in terms of application, and we've managed to get more than 10 million applications. When we started the same process last year, the situation was different, and I think it gives me a sense of comfort that at least the problems which existed when we started, we don't necessarily experience them now. We are in the process of making sure that we dispense, we submit the payment file. When we started on Wednesday, we started with 6,000. On Thursday, we went to 250,000. And today, we were on 700,000. And we are trying to make sure that at least by Tuesday, we have 2.5 million people, so that we move with speed, so that we are able to dispense, and those who qualify, we are able to process their payment. But from where I am, in terms of all these multiple channels of application, we did not experience much problems. And I think within 15 days, we managed to get 10 million applications. It shows that the system has improved. But obviously, we know that we will pick up people who are in NSFAS, who are not supposed to get the grant. We obviously know that we'll get some people who will appear in other government departments. Our system has improved such that when we get an application, it's able to bounce with other government departments, with Home Affairs and so on. For an example, if you give us a fraudulent ID, we're able to bounce it with Home Affairs, and we'll then be able to pick it up immediately, and the system will automatically kick you out. So I'm comfortable from where I sit that the situation has improved drastically to what happened last year, and at least I'm not having sleepless nights like I used to have. Yes, I worry a lot to make sure that everybody gets what is due to them.
Paseka, before I let you go, I thought I'd give you an opportunity to give us an update, just moving away from this latest development on government employees being found in the system trying to apply for this SRD grant. Just last month, my colleague Ronald Masunda did a story based down in Cape Town where it found that over 10,000 people had been implicated in defrauding Sassa in recent months, benefiting from that social relief of distress grant as well. There was comment at the time from the agency saying that almost half of the culprits living outside of the country, but of course it's ordinary citizens that really need that money. And at the time, Sassa said it was working closely with the MPA, SIU and Hawks to help prosecute and help recover those millions of rands. Can you give us an update just very shortly before I let you go on that story specifically?
Yes, there are people who were prosecuted successfully. Some of them were not only in the Western Cape. We had people who were prosecuted in Mpumalanga, in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. But what we simply do, once a person has been identified as a fraudster, we basically take the information to the SAPS and observe the situation until its finality. But I think we know that sometimes the processes takes longer, and we need to make sure that we respect that particular process. But what we can assure you is that if you are found to be in the wrong, you will definitely be taken to task and people will face the music. But we are paying a very serious attention to people who are attempting to defraud the social grant system, and will definitely put measures in place to make sure that nobody pass and steal money which is meant for the poor.
Now, prosecutions, of course, is a good thing, but I remember that story done by Ronald speaking to the victims of that fraud, saying that they were still waiting to have their monies reimbursed. I know this is an off-the-cuff question because I didn't prepare you for this part of the interview. Do you have any update as to whether or not those people have been reimbursed for that money that was fraudulently taken from them?
Okay, no, thanks. I'm saying we have been working very close with the South African post offices, and once the money has been taken out of your account, you are able to write an affidavit, go to the post office, and the matter gets investigated immediately. And I'm happy about the turnaround time, because the turnaround time is such that you don't want to investigate the case for 3 months, because the beneficiary who has been defrauded must get their money. So the processes of post office and Sassa are such that you put the interest of a beneficiary at heart, and majority of them, once they come and report the matter, we have managed to resolve the matter, their problems, as quick as possible, and the beneficiaries were paid what is due to them.
Okay, thank you for taking our questions on that as well. Paseka Letsatsi is the spokesperson for Sassa, joining us there from here in Johannesburg. Thanks for your time this evening.